Hi, my name is Jeff Sackman. I run a website called gmathacks.com, and on that site you can find a lot of great tips for how to improve your GMAT score. Some of those tips actually refer to GMAT time management. Now, most of the time you spend studying the GMAT, you're going to spend learning new techniques, practicing sample test problems, practicing your underlying math fundamentals. But no matter how good you get at that kind of stuff, you're still going to have to manage your time during the test. And since the GMAT is an adaptive test on the computer, there are some things that make it a little different from tests you might have taken under time circumstances in the past. So I want to go over some of the basics of how to manage your time on the GMAT to maximize your score based on the fundamental knowledge that you have. You want to be able to prove that to the test that you really do know that stuff and not waste it just because you don't know how to watch the clock at the right times. So GMAT time management, there are two major sections of the GMAT. For today's purposes, we're going to set aside the analytical writing assessment. The essays pale in importance compared to the quant section and the verbal section. After you write a couple of 30-minute essays, you move on after a 5-minute break to the 75-minute quant section. That's the math. In 75 minutes, you have to answer 37 questions. And on the computer, you're given one question at a time. There's no going back. There's no skipping. One question, you pick an answer, you move on. Next question, pick an answer, move on. So you're under a lot of pressure with every single question. It's okay to guess, to pick any answer and then move on, but there's no going back at that point. So time management is trickier on this test than on something like the SAT or a calculus final, where you can move around on the page, you can flip back a page, you can mix up your time between different questions. All that stuff is not an option on the GMAT. So from the very beginning, 75 minutes, 37 questions, what you've got to be thinking about is 2 minutes per question. That's almost exactly how much time the GMAT gives you. And you don't have to move on every 120 seconds like clockwork. It's not quite that strict. But you don't want to leave yourself too much wiggle room there. If you go too fast, you're probably missing some important points, you're not reading the questions thoroughly, you're skipping steps, you're getting questions wrong. If you're going too slowly, then you might not even finish the section. And if you don't finish the section, all the questions you didn't get to count as wrong. You get a penalty for not finishing the section. Short version, don't fail to get to the end. Make sure to get to the end. So think in terms of 2 minutes per question, no matter what the question looks like. If it's extremely hard, you might give it 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes to try your hand at it. But once you get past about 3 minutes, if you haven't figured it out, you're probably not going to. GMAT questions, especially on the math side, are designed to be solved in 2 minutes because they know full well that this is how much time they give you. If something's going to take you 5 or 6 minutes, you probably don't fully understand it. So once you hit that 3-minute mark, you've got to move on. Ideally, you moved on even before that. So you're always keeping an eye on the clock. You're always thinking in terms of 2 minutes a question, and you're making sure that you're going to get all the way through the GMAT quant section so that you don't get that penalty for not finishing it. One more note on the quant section is the difference between problem-solving questions and data sufficiency questions. About 1/3 of the GMAT quant section is made up of data sufficiency questions. If you haven't been exposed to those yet, I suggest that you do so. Just Google GMAT data sufficiency and you'll find more than you need to know on my site or on others. It's a unique question format where you don't have to solve math questions. You have to look at some evidence and see whether the evidence is enough to answer a question. No solving, not a lot of calculations, but it can be pretty tricky, as anyone who's taken the GMAT can attest to. So when you're considering problem solving and data sufficiency questions, keep in mind that data sufficiency doesn't require as many calculations. It can be hard, but if you don't figure it out pretty quickly, there's only so much you can do. So that 2 minutes a question, we can make that a little more specific. Problem solving, you can go a little bit over. You can average maybe 2 minutes and 15 seconds per question. Data sufficiency, you probably should be getting through those in about 90 seconds per question. So shorter on the data sufficiency, a little longer on the problem solving, but not a big gap. And still, 90 seconds doesn't give you very much time, even if you don't have to do the calculations. So generally speaking, 2 minutes a question all the way through. Once you successfully finish the GMAT quant section, you get another 5-minute break and you move on to another 75 minutes of the GMAT verbal section. 75 minutes this time is given for 41 questions. A few more questions, so you have a little bit less than 2 minutes per question. And GMAT verbal questions are approximately 1/3 critical reasoning. That's a passage with one logical reasoning sort of question regarding that passage. Reading comprehension, which is one longer passage followed by 2 to 5 questions about that passage. And sentence correction, where you're given a sentence and you have to identify the answer choice that is most grammatically correct. So about 1/3 critical reasoning, 1/3 reading comp, and 1/3 sentence correction. The trickiest thing about time management on the GMAT verbal section is reading comprehension. As we've seen, 41 questions, 75 minutes, that's not a lot of time, less than 2 minutes per question, but every time you get to a reading comprehension passage, you gotta stop. You have to read through that entire passage, and that's gonna slow you down. Most people who have time management problems on the GMAT verbal section, this is where the problems arise. They spend way too long reading the passage, especially if English is not your first language or you're just not a particularly fast reader. You can end up sinking 5, 6, even 7 or 8 minutes in these passages. Don't do it. On my website, you'll find some tactics to working through the passages faster, and whatever you do, you have to figure out how to get through those passages in less time. A good guideline is 3 to 4 minutes per passage. Any less than 3 minutes and you're probably not reading it as thoroughly as you need to. More than 4 minutes and you're probably dwelling too much on the details, or you're rereading, or you're losing focus. Whatever it is that's taking you more than 4 minutes, it probably isn't working in your favor. So for these passages, 3 to 4 minutes apiece. Practice, use a stopwatch, make sure you're getting through those passages in the allotted time. Once you take out that amount of time, you're not left with very much to actually answer these 41 questions. So imagine there's 4 passages on the test, you take about 14 minutes, 3.5 minutes per passage. 14 minutes leaves you with barely an hour, so you're down to about 90 seconds per question. Critical reasoning, they have an individual passage with every question, so they'll probably take a little longer than that. Think 2 to 2.5, maybe as much as 3 minutes occasionally for the critical reasoning questions. Reading comprehension, we've talked about the passage, but the questions should be rapid fire, very quick. Once you've read the passage, a couple of those questions should be very easy. Either you know them or you don't, so think less than 60 seconds per question on reading comp. Sentence correction, there's not a lot of reading, there's not a lot of analysis because most of the answer choices are going to be very similar, so think 60 to 90 seconds. No more than 1.5 minutes except on the very longest or most difficult sentence correction questions. So 75 minutes, 41 questions, all these different question types, and you're really focusing on getting through the passages in 4 minutes or less. With these tactics, you'll be able to show off your fundamentals, you won't be pressed for time towards the end of the section, you won't be hit by a penalty, and you'll be in a position to get your highest possible GMAT score that your underlying skills deserve. For more tips on the computer adaptive test, on GMAT time management, do be sure to go to gmathacks.com. I've got a few hundred articles there that are all totally free, as well as a couple textbooks that you can buy that cover exhaustively GMAT math and GMAT verbal. So, I'll see you next time.